What a time to be a Total War fan. I'm gonna be honest, I was not expecting the information dump we got today. There's some really big news, both for Warhammer and the historical side of Total War games. So I was gearing up to go on Total War Official's Twitch channel with CA Waylon, and we got a couple bombshells dropped on us only a few minutes before I went live. That stream is archived on Total War Official, by the way, if you want to go check out the multiplayer games we played. But let's cover the news first, and then we can go a bit more in-depth and do some speculation on what these additions could be. Here's some news on the Old Friend. The Old Friend will indeed be our next content drop for Warhammer. It's tied to an event later in the summer. I know there's some excitement around it, but it's just a small thing that we wanted to do. Think along the lines of the Blood Knight free LC rather than Lords or anything like that. Not saying it's a unit specifically, but that sort of scale addition to the game. The event gave us the chance to do something, so we took it. So it's been teased on the free content schedule for a long time now, but we finally have a rough time frame for when this thing is going to release. I'm pretty sure it's going to drop sometime in July, because it won't be dropping alongside the next piece of content, which I'll talk about in a moment. And remember, all this stuff needs to come out before Total War Warhammer 2, which I'm thinking will launch in September or October. I still think the Old Friend will be Krell as a legendary hero, or a summon for Kemmler for the vampire counts, which might end up upsetting some people because they honestly have been given more love than many of the other factions in Game 1. But at the same time, Heinrich Kemmler is an absolute joke in the base game, and CA employees stated explicitly on the forums that he would get some kind of rework or buff quite a few months ago. So if it's gonna happen, now is the time to do it. I knew that Total War Warhammer wasn't done with content for Game 1. Over the last couple weeks, I've speculated that the Empire would be getting another DLC to add some sub-factions and new start positions, as well as the missing Knightly Orders. I still think that'd be a fantastic addition to the game, and I think that it would have gone over really well with the community, but I was not prepared for the announcement we got here. There will be a new race pack released later in the year, before Warhammer 2 is released. No, it's not Kislev, sorry, but the new content team have got some rather unique gameplay mechanics for this new race, and it will come with a small update to the main game and a free LC drop. This particular free LC will benefit not only main game owners, but also DLC owners too this time. This is gigantic news for Warhammer fans for a multitude of reasons. One, we're getting more content, which is nice in and of itself, because we haven't gotten anything new since Bretonnia, and it means new toys to play with, and more patches as well, which, generally speaking, is not a bad thing for the game, obviously, but this is a really big deal because along with Party Elite's interview, where Andy Hall essentially confirmed that CA is digging really deep into the lore to add factions and playable units, and where they expressed their ability to be a bit more flexible than we had initially anticipated with the trilogy in terms of their contract with GW, it means we'll be getting our first official playable minor faction. For those who don't remember, race packs introduce a new playable race in the game, either as a first appearance or adding a full unit roster, heroes, lords, and playable legendary lords to non-playable existing races in the core game. Race in this instance doesn't mean actual race, it means a new playable faction that isn't a sub-faction. So Krakadrak dwarfs, for instance, could be considered a race pack, even though we already have dwarfs in the base game, because they're kind of their own cultural anomaly, essentially. So I've seen some people mention Tomb Kings and Chaos Dwarfs or Ogres as the next race pack, but I seriously doubt we will be getting any more major factions in Game 1. Remember guys, CA still has to sell Game 2 and Game 3 and DLC for both games. Adding yet another major Warhammer Fantasy Battle race in Game 1 will seriously front load this trilogy and make it harder to sell the sequels. Geographically, those races just don't make much sense, as they would all require a pretty significant addition to be made to the current campaign map. And contrary to popular belief, the foggy area to the south of the current map is not actually Nehekara. The only Tomb King city that could possibly fit on the current map is Numas, the Scarab city. Everything else is still the Badlands. I think Skaven is also a super lofty expectation. We essentially know they'll be headlining in Game 2, so releasing them for Game 1 doesn't make much sense at the moment, even if they're trying to tie them into Game 2. I think it's much more likely Skaven Blight will be a pre-order bonus for Game 2 that allows you to play Ratmen with a start position in the old world, and would definitely entice a lot of people to buy the game, but wouldn't be very cancerous because they're not holding Skaven back behind a bonus. You'll get to play them regardless, just in a unique and interesting position, which might be a good compromise for those of you who don't like the pre-order bonus faction packs. But no, I'm feeling very confident that this race pack will be a minor faction in the old world. We know it's not Kislev, so no Bear Cav yet. I will say I think this announcement does bode well for Kislev sometime later down the line though, but I think there are two clear choices here. Either the Dogs of War coming with Talea and or Astalia, or Norsca. These are the most major, minor factions currently on the Game 1 map, and both are screaming for more fleshing out. The fact that CA says this DLC will also benefit DLC owners is huge news. It has me really excited that either the Beastmen or Chaos will get some additional love. I feel like it needs to be content for either the Beastmen or Chaos in terms of the free LC component, because they are far and away the factions in the worst spots in comparison to their tabletop rosters. I fully expect the Warriors of Chaos to get more content later down the line, so if I had a choice, I hope it's for the Beastmen. Getting the Gorgon and or the Doombull would be really nice. I'm just not sure CA will ever revisit them if they don't get their remaining units soon. The interesting thing here though is that the Dogs of War faction lines up perfectly with the idea that this new content will benefit DLC owners, and there's quite a bit of evidence to support their addition. So the Dogs of War are the original regiments of renown, a collection of diverse and interesting mercenary companies and heroes who ply their trade across the entire world. They originated in Talea, the southwest of the Empire, and essentially sell their services to the highest bidders. If they get added, that almost guarantees a mercenary feature that would benefit DLC owners as well, in that DLC factions would also be able to potentially recruit these units or faction-specific regiments of renown. I doubt it if CA would add full 8 to 10 reskin units for each of the DLC factions, but alongside a mercenary recruitment feature, I could totally see them adding a handful of regiments of renown for each DLC faction that can only be recruited through that mercenary pool. That would not require a massive amount of work in terms of free content. It would be essentially reskinning and changing the unit's mechanics just a little bit like we have in the previous regiments of renown, but it would just be literally recoloring them and changing their stats a bit, so I think that could totally be doable. Additionally, I think the Dogs of War make a massive amount of sense because they are one of the few factions that provide a great segue between Game 1 and Game 2. Talaeans and Astalians are known for their impact in the New World, specifically their expeditions into Lustria, and Perazzo's Lost Legions, and others have a lot of lore tying them to the home of the Lizardmen. Anaconda's Amazons also spring to mind. They are very unique, very exciting race that would provide a ton of flavor to the old world and make a lot of people really happy, I think. And let's not forget that Star Dragons are coming in Game 2 and presumably are already complete. It would make a lot of sense to get a Sarniel the Dragon Lord as a High Elf Prince on a Star Dragon as a teaser, and he's certainly one of the highlights of the Dogs of War roster, although actually Deathfang is green and he's not a forest dragon, so I don't know for sure if Games Workshop ever confirmed what kind of dragon he is. I always assume Star Dragon, but he might not be. Let me know if I'm wrong on that front. I think Norsca is the other possibility for the race pack. They obviously play a huge role in the current campaign as a gigantic annoyance with hordes of chariot spam and marauder horsemen that run around and love wasting your time for 20 minutes. In the base game, they're sometimes more of a threat to you than the Warriors of Chaos, but that's mostly because they make you seriously consider killing yourself so you don't have to deal with yet another cheesy AI spam army. Their roster is super boring and generic currently, which is to be expected because they never really had their own army book. Tons of mentions in the lore, and they've had supplements and certain units show up in the tabletop game and its analogs, but never a fully fleshed out army book just for the Norskins. Now I would have said Dogs of War is all but guaranteed, but for this quote from CA Rich on Reddit. People were talking about what the race pack could be, and Rich comes in with a bombshell and says, "You're all so cold," with a little snowflake emoji. I mean, that's a pretty blatant hint, or pretty blatant misdirection. Sure, it could mean Crack-a-Drac or something, but let's be honest, if that hint is legit, it's Norsca. And a Norsca race pack could be awesome, because it would be made essentially from scratch, from deep corners of the lore, and a lot of creativity on CA's part. Think about what we could get here. Norse mythology creatures like frost giants, chaos war mammoths would enter the fray, werewolves, skin wolves, and more Viking themed units that you may have seen in beginning of the end times, like berserkers, bondsmen, axe throwers, and stuff like that. In the lore, there are mentions of ice drakes and blood krakens, And remember, the Dark Elves have a good shot at getting that Charybdis because CA is hitting the monsters pretty hard in Game 2. So there'd be a base skeleton there already for a Blood Kraken, because no one really knows exactly what that thing looks like anyway. I don't think it was ever playable in the tabletop. So they could make a really unique, scary, and diverse roster with some really cool monster units. I mean, Blood Krakens and Ice Drakes, that sounds like an awesome elite version of monsters to me. And then you'd have a bunch of Marauders and Viking units making up the base. In the case of a Norsca faction pack, I also think that bodes very well for the Warriors of Chaos or Beastmen getting a couple new toys to play with. Legit new toys, not a Regiment of Renown reskin. So that's what we know about Total War Warhammer news. Pretty exciting stuff. For the historical side of things, I do want people to realize that I'm still a Total War YouTuber first and foremost. I've obviously taken a huge liking to Warhammer over the past year and really enjoy the universe and its lore, and that has certainly been the focus of my channel recently, but when historical news and Total War games drop, I will be right there to cover that stuff as well, as long as the game is good. So for example, I think Attila was a pretty decent game overall, but I wasn't in love with the time period. It is still one of the worst optimized games in Total War history. It runs like utter dog crap, and the multiplayer metagame was trash. They did some really interesting and fun stuff with the campaign, but I don't do as much campaign content, so I just didn't cover Attila a whole lot. But Creative Assembly is definitely trending in a very positive direction in my opinion, across the board, so I expect whatever historical content launches next will be very polished and entertaining to play. I'm going to go less in-depth with my speculations here, because I don't want this video to drag on too long, and I think the historical information is worth its own video, as I go much more in-depth behind the history that might be getting hinted at, but let's read the news now and do a bit of speculation on what these hints could mean. There is quite a big hint that a lot of people probably haven't seen yet that I'll cover in a bit, because it kind of went flying under the radar. The most recent project team to kick into full production is now working on a particularly large campaign pack DLC for one of our more recent historical releases. It's an expansion we've been wanting to do for a while now, so we're very happy that we've been able to get it onto the schedule for later in the year. At the moment, this team is building art content and working on the update for the main game needed to accommodate the new expansion. We will certainly be sharing more details when we can. So this will obviously be for Rome 2 or Attila. If it's for Attila, it's kind of a double-edged sword. On one hand, I think Attila is worse than Rome 2 Emperor Edition, so I might end up caring less about it, but on the other hand, if it means CA actually goes in and works on optimization and getting the game to run smoother, I'm all for it, because that will benefit the game as a whole, and benefit mods like Rise of Mordor and the Game of Thrones mod later down the line. The concept art shows a faction symbol that looks a lot like the Cherusci tribe, and the warrior definitely has a 1st or 2nd century AD Germanic vibe about him. I honestly don't think it's Viking related. It looks to me like he's wearing Lorica Hamada, which is what the Romans wore during that time period in the 1st, 2nd century AD. So with all that information, I can totally see Creative Assembly doing a Germanicus vs Arminius campaign pack that focuses on the aftermath of Teutoburg Forest and the Roman campaign in Germania. That's my best guess. I can't say I'm incredibly excited for it at the moment, just because we have been given a lot of Rome vs Barbarian DLC packs in the past, but there's no question both Arminius and Germanicus are both very interesting historical figures, and their war was a brutal and important component of Roman history. I'm definitely open to the idea of that campaign pack, but I think it's one of those things where CA will have to add a lot of new mechanics to really hold my interest for a while. Nothing of substance to really report on in terms of the next big historical title, which of course will be a time period that CA have never covered before. There's so many different things it could be. I think I can go in depth with those in another video, but Three Kingdoms China, Victorian era, and Mongol conquests of the East are all near the top of my list of time periods that could be covered and would be very interesting time periods for a Total War game. But here's some really good news from the Black Ops team that I think is going to make you guys really happy. We're pleased to say that our plans for a new standalone title have come to fruition, and this team are now in full production on an exciting new release. We're planning to set this in an era we've already visited, but we'll cover a particular period we are very fond of and haven't done enough justice yet, which implies they've done it before, but maybe not to the specifications they would have really loved to. We've been thinking a lot about how our major releases cover eras. Our character-based follow-ups span the events of iconic lives like Napoleon or Attila, but that we are also interested in flashpoint moments. Those shorter, intense periods where events could have unfolded in any direction, dramatically changing the course of history in only a handful of months or years. Fall of the Samurai, being based on the Boshin War, is a great example of this. We are planning this new title to be similar in intent. It will also arrive before the next major historical title the team above are working on. So this information, alongside some concept art that dropped a few months back that I think a lot of people didn't get a chance to see, heavily hints at an Alexander the Great or Diadochi Wars standalone game. Alexander is obviously a larger-than-life character who is iconic in history. He had a very short, intense period of conquest that changed world history forever, and the concept art looks just like I would expect him to. Although it is possible this is arena concept art or something else, I doubt it, because Alexander is already in arena and doesn't quite look like the previous picture. But take special note of the helmets and armor these guys are wearing. I might end up butchering the pronunciations here, but this appears to be a Boeotian helmet worn by Thessalian and companion cavalry because it was open and allowed for good peripheral vision and unimpaired hearing. The helmet this lady is wearing looks like a Chalcidian helmet, again not sure about pronunciation on that, or at the very least an early Hellenistic helmet. So I think a campaign focusing on Alexander the Great or the Diadochi Wars, the war between his empire's successor states, could be a really cool standalone game that I would really enjoy. It's a super interesting period of history, and like I said, I think the historical info is worthy of its own video, where we can go more in depth with the history behind these conflicts, talk more about the factions that would be involved in them. But I hope you guys enjoyed this information drop today. Really good news for the Total War series. I certainly enjoyed everything I saw. It's a really, really exciting time to be a Total War fan from a history and a fantasy perspective, and I hope you guys are as excited for the future of this series as I am. Have a good one. Indy Pride, signing out for now.